Hello there, this is Warpath 1985 speaking, and for today's video slash review, I shall be discussing the Star Wars The Vintage Collection Shadow Trooper and the later released Gamer Edition Shadow Trooper. So, if you're curious as to why I'm doing the more audio format similar to the previous reviews beforehand, unlike those situations where it was due to audio problems, in this case, I mainly wanted to do it so that I can have a much more shorter and more basically simplified review that's not as much filled with various fluff and etc. Besides that, the specific versions of the Shadow Troopers are more or less the huge difference between the Asian Division 1 and also general history, etc. is pretty confusing. But generally, what the Shadow Troopers are basically is that they're this type of Stormtrooper stealth unit that was first introduced in a Star Wars Marvel comic book back in the late 70s or early 80s, I believe it was, and originally they were called Black Hole Troopers. Then they were reintroduced again in the early 2000s, you know, basically due to nostalgia, etc. And they came that more traditional, just black and silver design that we now know of, relatively speaking. However, their hugest role will be as an enemy in the Force Unleashed video game series. And due to that, they receive a different version as well, where they'll be entirely gumwood gray with blue accents or highlights to emphasize their cloaking abilities they had in the game, which is what the figure is representing when I'm removing in this general review or general just video. Um, However, they will be revised again in 2015 for Battlefront 1 or the EA version, mind you. But generally, that version is a mixture of both, really. It's really confusing in general. But basically, it has the original kind of Earth 2000s design, but has the cloaking abilities from Force Unleashed, which is pretty cool. However, I believe it was mentioned somewhere in the lore, but once again, it's pretty confusing because already this history is long and, as mentioned before, confusing. But generally, the usual distinction between all three of them is that Black Hole Troopers, their armor is wholly colored in a single color, that being, well, black. The second version that was released in the early 2000s was black and silver. The version released through Force Unleashed was entirely gunmetal gray, with obviously the blue accents here and there. And finally, we see the version that we know today, and one is really seeing most merchandise now on since then, like 2015. And that is the version where it's a mixture of all three, where it's a black armor with silver accents and has a cloaking ability. However, also you had the early 2000s version, was traditional Shadow Trooper technically, not the Black Hole Trooper, where it has the Imperial insignia. But still, that's just a thing that's seen sometimes. But besides that, the figures themselves, already speaking, pretty simple overall. Um, Basically, they use the same general construction as your standard Vintage Collection Stormtrooper. Particularly derived from the engineering scene with the Stormtrooper was our first real, like, a super articulated figure. But generally, it uses various hinges instead of more like recently, where they're more just using ball hinges and ball joints and etc. This design philosophy was derived from obviously G.I. Joe Retro Collection, which is the same because that means the figure's articulation is heavily limited, impacted, etc. Obviously, we fixed later on with the slightly technically more articulated Stormtrooper body that has like proper ankle rockers instead of the ankle like hinges. Although that hasn't really changed since then, where they received the ball joints in the hips, so like ball hinges. So that is a great shame. And obviously, the figures do look very good and together as well, and along with other figures as well. However, their accessories are also relatively simple, with the first version coming with a larger blaster, the Star Wars equivalent with like a light machine gun. I forget what exactly it's called, but it comes with that blaster. It also comes with a, give it a saying like it's 11. I think it's Q11. But also the Force Unleashed figure does come with accessories as well. And beyond the plastic that is gunmetal gray, the accessories consist of also of a E11 and uniquely enough, a sniper rifle. Particularly the version that was used primarily by scout troopers, both seen in the original Battlefront, like it was like one or two games. I think it was like both really, and also other supplementary media, comics, etc. But more specifically, Star Wars Battlefront 2 that was released in the 2017 by EA. So yeah, that's pretty cool. That was also in there as well. But also, obviously, the Shadow Troopers fall in the line of these various other specialized black armored stormtrooper types, which I do have like a few. That be like the weird elite troopers seen in Bad Patch, which we're only seeing like what in season one really, and also obviously the Death Troopers, which I do have a couple. But yeah, that's all for this review. A very simple, very easy, very quick review, and for recommendations. Technically, I do recommend the Force Unleashed version a lot more over the fact that it does have those easier availability options, etc. And also it's pretty cheap overall, unlike the previous version, which was unfortunately a Walmart exclusive, which does suck because I do much prefer the standard version that was released. Unfortunately, in this case, you can't redo that because again, it's so very hard to find. I paid like a decent chunk of money to get this thing. I like it was like Star Wars Celebration 2023, I think. I think it was 22 or 23. But yeah, pretty expensive figure. Unlike the Force Elite version, which is dirt cheap basically. But yeah, that's all for this review. Like, comment, subscribe, and hopefully I shall see you next time. Bye.